Good morning.
Hello.
Good morning, Janet. Hello.
Hello.
We are trying to put you in contact, in eye contact with our participants. This is the best we can. Thank you.
I'm sorry I can't be there personally. Very sorry.
Thank you for joining us via web stream.
Yes.
Please go ahead with your presentation.
Okay, I'm going to try and share my slides directly, see if we can do that. Just bear with me for a second while I try and do this. Can you see the slides? Okay.
Now we can see your laptop, your screen. You are seeing your screen.
Okay, so maybe we're on the right track then. Can you see it now? Can you see the slides?
No, we only see your screen.
Yes. So this is I'm showing it on my screen now. Is that not showing now?
Yes, it is. It is.
Ah, perfect. Okay, that's great. So I think I have half an hour. I've been given strict instructions not to go beyond half an hour. And then we have, I think, a little time for questions and answers at that point. So I'm so sorry I can't be there personally. Maybe another time we can meet face to face. But my name is Janet Veitch. I'm a member of the UK Women's Budget Group. And I've been involved with them since probably about 1997. I think I started being involved. And I'm the previous chair of the group. And I'm now on the management committee. So I'm just going to talk to you today a little bit about what we've done in the UK on gender responsive budgeting. I'm going to do it mainly from the perspective of the Women's Budget Group. I'm going to try and remember to talk a little bit slowly because I know that we've got some interpreters working and they're trying to keep up. So I'll try and do it a little bit slowly. So I'm going to talk from the perspective of the Women's Budget Group, but also from the perspective of being an ex-civil servant. So I worked as a civil servant for 30 years in London in the UK government. The last 10 years of that, I was working for the Ministers for Women, and they were very interested in gender budgeting. So I did a lot of work as a civil servant, and then I came into the Women's Budget Group and did work with them. So that's my background. So I'm very interested in how you implement these things. I'm not a professional economist myself, but I'm very interested in how you make gender budgeting part of your day-to-day work as a civil servant when you're trying to incorporate it into policy making. Okay, so are you all getting the second slide?
Yes.
Fantastic. Okay, it's all working. Very good. It's so unusual for technology to actually work properly. So our history is that we were set up in 1989, and we are a network of feminist economists, researchers, policy experts and campaigners. The overall objective of our work is to achieve a more gender equal future. We're particularly interested in following the money. The reason we think gender budgeting is a crucial part of gender mainstreaming and thinking about women's equality is because the money is the most important thing. If you follow the money, where the money is going, you'll see where the real priorities are and where things are actually going to get done. But a lot of campaigns on women's equality, as you will be very aware, do not include thinking about budgets or money. And we do find that it's quite difficult to get people to think about these things, particularly in the finance ministries across the world. They are mainly still run by men. It's relatively unusual to find a finance ministry in any government that has a lot of women in it. And they tend not to think very much about equality issues. That isn't universally true, but it's certainly true, been true in the UK. So we have found that setting up this separate group for feminist economists and women who work on these issues to be able to come together has been really useful and powerful in raising this as a concern. So our objectives, we've got three main objectives. We put forward economic policies that are designed to create a more gender equal future. So we attempt to develop policy positions that we can then give to government to say, look, this is how you could do it if you wanted to improve women's equality. We work with all the political parties in order to do that, not just the government in power. And if nobody in government will listen to us, which does happen sometimes, then we would go to the media and we would go to women's organizations to build their capacity to try and campaign for these things. And that brings me to our second objective, building the capacity of women and women's groups to participate in economic debate. And this is because many women feel that they're not qualified to talk about finance. But of course, everybody and almost all women actually deal with are responsible for the family budget and what happens in the household. So actually people do understand what budgets mean. It's just that they're presented in such a complicated way that it can make women feel that they can't participate. So we try and demystify. I think that's a really important kind of message. If you're trying to do gender responsive budgeting, you'll all be familiar with the idea of participative budgeting, where communities are asked to think about how money should be spent locally. What we're trying to do is make sure that women are able to and have the capacity to work within those groups. And then finally, we scrutinize government economic policy from a gender perspective. So we're always looking at whatever policies government has adopted, macroeconomic policy, fiscal policy, labour market policies. We look at all those and we say, what does this mean for women? What does it mean for promoting women's equality? Okay, so the sorts of things we do, we work with these 4 different groups, our main groups that we try and influence. There are obviously others we could talk to. We could talk to local government, for example, but we just don't have the resources to do a lot of that. So we mainly work with women in Parliament, and we provide them with briefing and analysis so that when they go into the parliamentary debates, or when they're sitting on parliamentary committees and they're asking witnesses questions, that they understand the gender analysis, the gender implications of what they're talking about. Similarly, we talk to government and government officials, and we try and influence policy before it's made, and we try and undertake training with government officials. And I'll say a little bit more about that later on, but we've had some success in getting government to agree to us coming in and undertaking training for them. We work with the media and on social media to raise awareness generally. So, for example, the government will issue a national budget every year, and we are always ready with comments on that. we undertake an immediate analysis of what they've announced, and we will put a press release out to the media, and we will usually appear on radio and television to comment on what the government is proposing to do from a gender perspective. And this is really helpful because it not only helps us to influence the public and make them realize that this is important, but it also helps us to influence the government generally, because if they see us on television, and they see this as something that the media are taking an interest in, then they're more likely to listen to us, and it becomes a virtuous circle of us trying to influence, and our media profile helps us do that. If we had more resources and more money, we would do more on this. And then finally, women's organizations. I've already talked a little bit about this, but there are all sorts of organizations. This is true in every country in the world. There are lots of women's organizations working on these issues. They have a lot of frontline knowledge, expertise. They understand what women's situation is. And what we attempt to do is share with them our knowledge of what this means in economic terms, what this means in financial terms, and for fiscal policy, for tax and spending policies. And we try and build their understanding so they feel able to work on these issues and to challenge government if they think that these things are not being looked at properly. Okay, so I thought it would be helpful just to say a little bit about the resources, the main resources that we draw upon to do this work. The first and most important really are our feminist economists. And feminist economists, as you will be very well aware, are in short supply. We're very, very fortunate in the UK to have a number of internationally known feminist economists like Diane Elson, who's done a lot of work globally. There are a few women working on this issue globally. So there's Debbie Budlander, who famously has done a lot of work in South Africa. There are women working in South America and in America, but there's really only small numbers. And what we try and do is draw in academics from across the different academic areas. So we have not just feminist economists, but feminist sociologists, feminist psychologists, feminist accountants, feminist lawyers. These are all women who are working on different aspects of women's equality. And we try and bring them into this work so that they are able to see how their particular area of interest impacts on, has a financial aspect to it. So, and again, I'll try and say more if there's time on this particular issue, but if you think about the policy issue of violence against women and girls, for example, we have done, one of our feminist economists, Sylvia Walby, has done a great deal of work on how violence against women and on the costs of violence against women and girls to the state. And by costing this, this issue, we've been able to make a business case for why money should be spent, why money should be invested on preventing violence against women and girls. Because the government is able now to see very clearly how much this is costing them. And if they invested money in prevention work, they would be able to save the expenditure that they're currently incurring on health costs for women who are injured, on recovery costs, on the costs of rehousing entire families if there's domestic violence, putting those children into new schools. All these costs, the costs of the criminal justice system, the costs of investigating the crimes, the costs of putting the mainly male perpetrators into prison. She added all these costs up using state costing mechanisms, so they weren't able to argue with the figures. And it's this issue of how you link together the money that's being spent with the policy issue that's being thought about. This is the power of gender budgeting. And I think the second really important, powerful thing about gender budgeting is that it moves us away from a purely ethical argument. So much of the time when we as feminists, as women who are working on women's equality, we use the ethical argument to say this is the right thing to do and you must do it because it is the right thing to do. But when you start talking about gender budgeting, you're talking about the business case, why it makes economic sense to do this work. And we find that often governments listen to that argument more than they listen to the ethical argument for a feminist analysis. So our feminist economists help us to do this. And we're also looking at how we can increase the supply of feminist economists by working with the universities to see if we can incorporate feminist economists, or economics rather, into the mainstream economics courses. So everyone who's trained as an economist begins to understand the feminist analysis. So those of you who are economists will know about the principle of economic man and the model of economic man which is used. And most economic modeling is done on the basis of a male breadwinner, rather than thinking about, for example, the unpaid work that women do, the caring work that women do, and the work that women do which is not counted in state accounting systems. These things are invisible in our economic modeling. And so it's very difficult to measure what's going on for women and to do the kind of analysis that I'm talking about. So we're working hard to try and get this incorporated, included into economics courses. And we're also trying to encourage the government to change its entry criteria for the Government Economics Service. So in the UK, the government here employs in a specialist capacity economists, and we want them to make it mandatory for anyone who wants to enter the Government Economics Service to have a qualification in, to have an understanding of feminist analysis of economics. So that's the first thing. We work with feminist activists in the way that I've already really described. We try and come together with them to explain what the economic impact of their area is and how we can help them do costings with that and do economic modeling around their area, be it health or violence or any of those issues, women, the gender pay gap, all these things have a clear financial implication. One of our big resources is this third one, parliamentary allies. So particularly women parliamentarians understand the importance of the budget, understand the importance of money, so are very keen to have our analysis, are very keen to understand what we do. And when we give them this information, they will, which I'll show you an example of at the end of this presentation, an example of the kind of information we give them. They will then use that in Parliament to try and our ideas. Femocrats, this is a bit of a new word, but it's feminist bureaucrats. So it's women who are working in local government, in central government, as civil servants, as government officials. These women are very keen to see gender mainstreamed into the policy areas that they're responsible for. So we work closely with them. And they arrange for us to come in and meet ministers and talk to other members of the civil service about how we think their policies will have an impact on women and what that means. And then finally, we also work with a number of women journalists. We also work with men, but we find that women are more interested in this issue than men are. So we try and brief women journalists so they understand what the issues are also. So moving on to achievements, I wanted to give you just a flavour of what we've tried to do in the UK. I should say that this is still not a success story. So I'm telling you the things that we've done, but there are lots of things that we haven't done very well yet. And that's true across the world. That's true across Europe. Different countries have made different levels of progress. So Spain has made a lot of progress in different areas. Germany and Austria have made a lot of progress. The Nordic countries, of course, as usual, have led the way in some of these areas. But I wanted just to talk about a couple of the things that we've done. What we call Pasture Wallets, that's thinking about how money is often transferred inadvertently by government policy from the woman's purse to the man's wallet. So, and I'll give you some examples of this as we go through this presentation. Judicial challenge. We have challenged in court the government's budget. And again, I'll come back to these examples. Every year we do an annual gender analysis of the government's budget and talk about the impact that it will have on women. And we talk to the government beforehand about what they're proposing to say in the government to try and influence that. I've talked a little bit already about our profile in the media and in Parliament, and without that we wouldn't be able to do a lot of the work that we do. And finally, capacity building projects, where we've worked with women, particularly women living in poverty, to think about how they can be more influential at local level with local government on local towns and village initiatives. Okay, so this is just an example of a House of Commons, that's our lower parliamentary house of our members of Parliament. And the House of Commons Library is the research wing of Parliament. And they've produced, this is the latest one they produced. And I show you this as, you can look this up online. I can send the link if people are interested in actually reading it. But it's a briefing paper that was produced for parliamentarians to read, which shows the gender impact of tax and benefit changes, of the changes to fiscal policy that the government announced last October. So this briefing paper was produced to inform the work of the parliamentarians, and they've started doing these regularly now. They didn't used to do them at all, but now they do, and I would say that's largely because of the influence that the Women's Budget Group has had in drawing these things to public attention. And you'll see on the contents page, I'll just run through this very quickly because we haven't got a lot of time. They start off by explaining the legal background, and the Equalities Act for us, our Equalities Act 2010 is quite an important act because it puts a duty on all public bodies, on all government bodies, to consider the impact on inequality, on tackling inequality of all the work they do. So what this essentially means is that any government policy must consider how it's going to close the equality gap between, for example, men and women, the sex equality gap. So we have this duty on government to think about these things, which they have ignored in the past, but we're trying to encourage them not to. The Labour Party is currently our opposition party, and they've been the traditional party in the UK that has taken most notice of equality issues and women's equality issues in particular. So we have worked a lot with them to try and encourage them to use our analysis, and that's what's included in this briefing paper. And then the Equality and Human Rights Commission is our Category A human rights institution in the UK, and they have also done an analysis, also drawing partially on our figures. And finally, what they've called alternative studies, these are the external analyses that have been provided, including ours and including other groups that have done similar sorts of work. So I wanted to show you that this is the kind of thing that is now incorporated, mainstreamed, if you like, into what the national government, what the government in London does routinely, what the Parliament does routinely. Okay, so I said I'd explain a little bit about some of the different things we've done. I'm conscious we've only got 10 minutes left for this, so I'll run through this quite quickly, but you will all have these slides. So the key point here is that changes in tax and benefits can have a disproportionate impact on women. And by benefits, I mean the money that is paid out, the social security, the welfare benefits that are paid out to men and women. I've also already explained that under the Equalities Act 2010, government must have due regard to the effect of all its policies on sex inequality. What we did was we took the government to court in 2010 because they issued a national budget which set out what the changes in taxes and benefits would be, what their fiscal policy would be for the coming few years. And we took them to court on the basis not of the content of it, but of the process, that they hadn't gone through the proper process to consider what the impact on women would be, what we call an equalities impact assessment. And this is working out what the impact on women would be. They hadn't bothered doing that. So we took them to court on that single failure of process. And as I've said here, the government argued that it simply wasn't possible for them to produce a gender impact assessment of the budget as a whole. They said it's just too complicated, we can't do it. But the court decided that budgets are covered by our equality law, and the government must improve what they do by improving data collection. So they told them that they had to disaggregate the impact of their taxation proposals and their proposals for spending policies on men and women. And this is quite a difficult thing to do because in most countries, data collection on these issues doesn't go below household level. Some countries have separate individual taxation, so it's possible to do it there. And in the UK, we have separate taxation for almost everything. But on spending, a lot of our data doesn't go below household level to the level of the individual. So this is quite difficult. So the court said that they had to start doing this. And they've done some of it. They haven't done it brilliantly, but taking them to court did make a difference. Okay, and then still listing our achievements. I've mentioned our gender annual analysis of the budget. So we meet officials in our finance department before the budget is developed. And we try and support them as much as we can in thinking about what the gender impact would be. And if we had the resources to do this, I would like to see this done at every level, not just at national government level, but also at local and regional level as well, so that women's organisations could go in and talk to the people who are setting out what the budget is going to look like and analyse it to see what the impact on women will be. And then we do an analysis as the budget is announced. So in the UK, the finance minister stands up in Parliament and reads the entire budget, reads out all the spending commitments that are being made and reads out the taxation commitments. And then there is a debate in Parliament, which may go on for 2 or 3 days, where the opposition party objects to what is being proposed, but the government party, of course, because it has a majority, would expect for its budget to go through, to be voted in favour of and accepted by Parliament. But they do spend 3 days debating it, and we supply briefing for that debate. And we will then provide a follow-up commentary if we think that what we've said has not been accepted. But in this way, they know in advance that we are going to be watching what they're doing and commenting on it. So having an active civil society and active economists who are able to provide this kind of analysis is very central to making gender-responsive budgeting work. Okay, I've talked a bit about capacity building. Because we don't have much time, I'll come back to that if people have specific questions about that project that we did. But basically it's called the Voices of Experience project. And on our website, you'll be able to find the toolkit that we provided for women and a description of the workshops that we ran for them to learn more about the policymaking process. I wanted to explain a little bit about the key tools that we use to do this work. First of all, you need economic modelling capacity. Now, your finance departments will have this, but it will tend to be not sensitive to gender. That is generally true across the world for government economic models. They are not generally sensitive to gender. So we work with the universities and we work with independent think tanks in order to get them to develop economic models that do allow us to look at the impact on men and women separately. And we're very dependent on this. It's difficult to do this work to any degree of sophistication without having some economic modelling capacity. It is possible to do some, but this is very important for us. And then we rely on 3 laws. We rely on the public sector equality duty, which is the duty I've already talked about. The government must think about the impact on men and women separately and on sex inequality when they're making any kind of policy or law. So this is called the public sector equality duty, and we rely on that if we want to hold government to account for doing these things. We rely on our Freedom of Information Act, which I don't know whether you have one in Portugal, but we do rely on that to force government to give us information about the impact, about whether they've undertaken a gender equality impact on the work that they've done. And finally, I've talked a little bit about judicial review, where we're able to take the government to court, and that's at local or national level, if we think that they've made a wrong decision or they haven't followed the right process in making their decision. And it was on that basis that we challenged their budget in 2010. Okay, so really quickly, in the last 5 minutes, I wanted to give you a concrete example of the things we've been talking about. So far we've looked at kind of an overview of the sorts of things we attempt to do. This is a real example of where we worked with a think tank to do some analysis of the tax and benefit changes and the changes in the services that were being provided to the public between 2010 and 2020. And this slide is called Intersecting Inequalities, because we were trying to look at the particular effect on white women as opposed to black and minority ethnic women. And in the UK, most black and minority ethnic women are either recent migrants who weren't born in the UK or have perhaps been here for a few generations, but will often have come from rural communities. So for example, we have a very large Pakistani migrant population where very few of the women speak English because they have come from rural villages in Pakistan. That just happens to be the bit of Pakistan that many people migrate to the UK from. And they are therefore in the poorer cohorts of society. They earn less, they find it more difficult to engage with the labour market, and they rely most on public services. So we wanted to do an analysis of how this works. And these are the headline figures. So the government announced changes in its fiscal policy, and they announced changes that they were going to run between 2010 and 2020. So we did an analysis of this, and we discovered that the poorest families would lose most money. The average drop for the poorest family was 17%. And for Black and Asian households, they experienced an even bigger drop of up to 20%. And we looked separately at lone mothers, because in the UK, lone mothers are almost all of the lone parents. So 92% of the families who only have one parent, that parent will be the mother. So it's very important in terms of women's equality to think about the impact of tax and benefits on mothers. and they experienced a drop of 18% when we did the analysis. Okay, I'm going to show you a series of slides quite quickly, which show the cumulative effect of the tax and benefit changes. Now, these are quite complicated slides, and I don't need you to take it all in this presentation. I just really wanted to illustrate for you how we've demonstrated that there are differences between men and women. So on this particular slide, what we're looking at is household income, and we're thinking about tax and benefit changes and what that means in terms of money that is lost. And we've divided it up, so the men are shown, controversially, the men are shown in pink and the women are shown in purple. So, and then we've divided it up amongst the poorest cohort, the middle income cohort, and the richest cohort. So you can see that the cuts in taxes and benefits have had a regressive effect. So the rich benefited more from the tax cuts and the benefit cuts. The richest, you see how short that loss is. These are all losses from 0% at the top to minus 25% money lost at the bottom. You can see that it's the poorest and the Asian groups and the women within those groups who lose out at each level. So these are to be able to represent this information graphically in this way is very important for us. Okay, I'm going to move on because I have a short number of these slides. This is an even more complicated one, but all you need to look at here is two things. First of all, you'll see that on the left, we've got the numbers of people who are not employed. That's the 3 columns on the left. And then on the right, we've got the 3 columns of the people who are employed. So amongst the non-employed, we've divided it up by race, and then we've divided each race up by men and women. And the important thing here is just to look at the overall figures at the bottom. What we've done for each column, we've actually divided it up according to the bits of income that they have and the changes to each one and what that has meant. But we don't need to worry about that today. All I'm interested is in being able to show to you that through this kind of modelling, we're able to demonstrate that, for example, if you look at white non-employed men, that's the very far left column, they lose out by just over £3,000 a year, but the women, the white women, lose out by just over £4,000 a year. And this is because of the nature of their reliance on public services. Women use public services more than men, and the gender pay gap also impacts on them for the employed ones. But for the non-employed women, they are more likely to have children that they need to look after. And when there are cuts, when there are cuts in the money that is paid to children, it is women who will lose more than men. So it's this graph is designed to enable people to see quickly the differences by race, the differences by whether you're employed or not employed, and the differences by sex. So I'm going to pass on from that. I'm sorry, I know that's a complicated one to take in, but it's just the being able to see the impact of this modelling that's important. This is a slightly simpler one, and I am nearly at the end of my presentation. So again, we've divided up by working age and non-working age. We've divided up by men and women. And we've divided up here particularly by public services and tax and benefits. Now, the particularly important point about this slide is demonstrating the difference between taxes and public services and where the two groups benefit most from those. So public services are the brown and tax and benefits are the blue. And if you look at the longest column here, you'll see that lone mothers are most dependent on public services and taxes. So when they change these, it has a greater impact. And this is where we found that lone mothers lose nearly 20% of their living standards. And this is both because taxes have been cut, which doesn't benefit them very much because they don't earn very much, but they are unable to, they now have to pay for the public services that have been cut. So we think this is a useful kind of graph to be able to demonstrate how a cut in taxes will help or impact less on people who are working, but doesn't benefit people who are not working. Okay, so because I'm already overrunning, I'm just going to say really quickly, these are the headline things that we discovered through this modelling work. Women use more public services and they actually provide more public services. And if public services are cut, which has happened a lot in the UK as a response to the global freeze in growth, they are more likely to have to increase their unpaid work if public services are cut. So if childcare services are cut, if hospital services are cut, women are the ones who have to replace these. And we've got a series of detailed figures that I won't go through, but you can read them for yourselves, how we found that cuts in public services. I'll just raise one: refugees, women who are fleeing domestic violence. 155 women and 103 children. In one day, we counted how many were turned away because there weren't spaces in refuges for them. And that was the number. And our population is around 60 million. So that gives you a sense of how many people are being turned away from refuges. Okay, and really quickly, I wanted to say something about taxation because it's often ignored. We're often thinking, when we think about gender responsive budgeting, I've lost you. Have you lost the slides?
Yeah, but we are hearing and seeing you. Yeah.
Okay, are the slides back again?
Yes, they are.
Okay, great. Don't know what happened. Okay, so tax is really important because often the government will cut tax and that is not seen to have a gendered impact, but it has a very gendered impact. And we've done quite a lot of research analysing the difference. So, for example, our government froze fuel duty. So petrol, diesel, all those fuels, the duty was frozen on them. So that saved people £9 billion that didn't go to the government. But it's men who mainly own cars in our country. So they were the main beneficiary. £13 billion was saved by not taxing. What we call corporation tax is tax that's put on any small or large business. It's mainly men who own the larger businesses in the UK, so they benefited more from that tax cut. Similarly, £22 billion was saved by not taxing people as highly. If you're not working at all, or you're working or you're earning a very low income, which a lot of women are, this benefits men more than women. And the same with tax on savings. If you save money in the UK, you will be taxed on the money that you've saved. And again, men have greater amounts of savings and assets than women do. So all these tax cuts benefited men more than women. And then finally, we have done one of our members, who was actually Jerome, who was due to speak instead of me this morning. He has done a very interesting piece of work on which, again, I won't read out because it would take me too long. But the basic bottom line is that we've discovered that if the government invested 2% of GDP in the care industries, childcare and elder care, that would generate twice as many jobs as putting the same amount into the construction industry. And those are the kind of things that we think are really important to persuade government to make the right investment in social infrastructure, which will benefit women more. I think that, and then finally the last slide is just my contacts, and I sincerely apologize for overrunning on my presentation, but I have, I think we have time now for questions.
Thank you so much for this presentation. Give us a lot of food for thought. We had a problem with the translation because the microphone is not working. So
okay.
We só, desculpem por não ter aqui tradução, mas houve problema com o microfone. So we'll ask people in the room if they want to ask questions, and we'll try to translate them as we can. Okay, Janet, thank you so much for your presentation. It was great.
Okay. I do apologize that my Portuguese isn't good enough to...
Sim, se quem quiser fazer alguma questão, o faça em português e nós fazemos a tradução em inglês, uma vez que há aqui um problema com o microfone.
Posso? Eu gostava de falar em português para as pessoas perceberem. Eu gostava de sublinhar que algumas dos indicadores que nos foram apresentados supõem o acesso à informação que em Portugal não seria possível, nomeadamente do sistema de impostos, da autoridade tributária, etc., que é muito opaca. Não é? E, portanto, gostava de saber quem fez os cálculos, se os cálculos foram obtidos desde a autoridade tributária britânica ou se foi ao abrigo daquela lei que obriga à transparência da informação governamental, porque essa é uma questão estratégica aqui, não é? O acesso à informação é uma questão estratégica para obter e poder calcular esses indicadores.
Hello. I'm going to try to translate for you.
Okay, thank you.
So our colleague, she's a feminist economist.
Excellent.
Maybe it's one of the 2 or 3 existing in Portugal, I'm not sure. But I'm sure they will increase the numbers from now on.
Great.
So the question is, some of the indicators you have used during your presentation, they actually require having access to information that, in the case of Portugal currently, is probably not available, namely from the tax authority.
Yes.
So her question is, how did you have access to this information in the UK?
Yes, this is not an easy thing to do, as you know. So there are several things that had to be done. We had to campaign for separate taxation for a start. And it's only since we've had separate taxation that we've been able to get access to these figures. So we've made progress here, and do you need to translate this before I go any further? Is that useful, or shall I just say the whole answer now?
I think you can say the whole answer and I will translate afterwards.
Okay, perfect. So with taxation, it's become easier for us in the UK because we have now got separate taxation. It took a long time to get it. But there are a lot of other things, like, for example, I said that we only have information at household level about a lot of tax and spending, about a lot of spending decisions. So households as a whole will be assessed to see if they are eligible for social security benefits. And it's therefore very difficult. So what we have done there is our feminist economists have very kindly analysed for us on a very small scale what the issues are. So our Department for Work and Pensions is the government department that deals with social security. They have commissioned some research to identify how money is divided up within the household, how money is spent within the household, and what money comes in. So where we don't have national level statistics of the kind that I was just showing you to do that modelling work, then we would do small scale stuff, and we would commission somebody, probably at one of the universities, to do the analysis and build the economic model for us that we could run the figures through.
Okay. Okay, so I'm going to try to translate now. Portanto, no Reino Unido, durante muitos anos, decorreu uma campanha no sentido de que a tributação fosse ao nível do indivíduo. Portanto, a individualização da tributação, o que levou muito tempo a ser implementado, mas que está em vigor agora. Agora, continua a ocorrer que muita da informação disponível ainda é ao nível das famílias, dos households. Portanto, a informação relacionada com como é que as famílias gastam as despesas das famílias e não ao nível das pessoas individualmente dentro da família. E é a esse nível que são feitas geralmente as análises de se as famílias são elegíveis ou não para os benefícios de proteção e segurança social, etc. Agora, quando de facto a informação não está disponível individualizada ao nível da pessoa, o que elas fazem no Reino Unido é, geralmente, encomendar alguns estudos específicos que demonstrem e que desenvolvam um modelo que possa demonstrar como é que efetivamente a despesa é realizada no seio da família. E geralmente fazem estes estudos, portanto são estudos geralmente encomendados às universidades e desenvolvidos por economistas feministas. Eu não sou da área da tributação em Portugal, portanto, se disse alguma coisa incorreta, corrijam, por favor.
Can I add something to that? So I was answering the question specifically from the perspective of somebody who is a feminist economist who's asking the question. So I wanted to give an answer that would relate to that. But I think there's a broader point about how we do this work. The important thing about it is not to waste too much time thinking about information that you don't have, because none of us ever have enough information to make good policy. So yes, we campaign for better data, and that's really important. But what we do is start with what we've got. So the first thing we do is find out what information we do have, how we think we know that there's a problem. And we work from there, and we get the parliamentarians to ask the government the questions, having identified the gaps. So just the process of looking at this, doing the analysis, seeing where the data are absent so you can't work out what's happening, you can't do the kind of modelling work I was talking about, and asking questions about that. This is a first and really important stage of gender budgeting. So I would hate people to think that gender budgeting is just about doing this kind of very complex economic modelling. That's a very key thing. But the really important thing is the policy work you do around it to give you more information and to try and do the analysis you can without necessarily having a lot of sophisticated tools at your disposal.
So, okay, I'm going to translate. Nomeadamente, para as pessoas que são economistas e economistas feministas, a resposta é que não vamos perder muito tempo a pensar que há dados de que precisamos e não existem. Portanto, a lógica é começar o processo a partir dos dados que existem. E para isso fazer o processo, o que significa fazer determinadas perguntas que identificam os dados que estão em falta. E portanto torna-se um processo em que a pouco se identificam esses dados que estão em falta e possivelmente eles estarão disponíveis no futuro. Mas este passo de começar a fazer as perguntas, a análise a partir do que existe é fundamental, e os orçamentos sensíveis ao género, para arrancarem, é com esta fase, porque é mesmo esta a fase essencial do processo. É o momento em que nos interrogamos, em que começamos a analisar a situação e percebemos que para irmos mais longe há dados que estão em falta. E, portanto, todos chegarão ao momento em que terão que os identificar e fazer alguma coisa nesse sentido. E no Reino Unido, de facto, o trabalho que elas fazem no Parlamento é fundamental no sentido de as perguntas serem feitas relativamente aos dados que ainda faltam. Portanto, é acima de tudo o processo, não pensar que os orçamentos sensíveis ao género significam desenvolver modelos económicos extremamente refinados, como algumas das análises que ela mostrou. Não, é começar com os dados que existem, é fazer a análise com os dados que existem, identificar os dados que faltam e, a partir daí, arrancar com o processo. Mais perguntas? Ana?
Foi muito falado a análise de impacto de determinadas medidas. So can you hear me?
I can, yes.
Okay, so you talked a lot about the impact of the measures in terms of a different impact for women and men.
Yes.
About in the construction of the measures, the political measures, do you have any recommendation for the people that are building those measures, not measuring the impact, but building the politics?
Building the politics, particularly, yes. Okay, so it's very like any work on women's rights. We work, first of all, to bring a coalition of women's organizations and women's voices together. And then we will try and influence those people who have the policy levers. So those are the people that I listed in one of my slides. For us, particularly, it's the parliamentarians. And what we do is we talk to them individually and we talk to them in the committees that they have. So there's a parliamentary committee that looks at government spending, for example, and brings ministers into Parliament to question them publicly about the budget and about financial policies. And we try and brief those parliamentarians in advance. Is this answering your question before I go any further? Is this what you're interested in?
Partially. I was also interested in, not in terms of parliament, but people that works in the ministry.
Okay, understand. Yes, okay. So this was something we used to do a lot, and we've been a lot less successful in recent years because our current government isn't interested in this. So we do something else then. So let me say all the different things. So when we had a Labour government in 1997, I was in the civil service, and my job was to support women's organisations in getting into government, getting the women's budget group to come into the finance department. So the first thing I did, so you need somebody in government who is supportive of you, somebody in whose interests it is to listen to what you have to say. Now, if you can make a good enough case, if you can show that the work that you're doing will have an impact on a government's ability to be elected, or will increase the GDP, for example, those are all good arguments to get in front of either a minister or civil servants. And so the example that I gave you at the beginning about Sylvia Walby's work, Costing Violence Against Women and Girls, that is a really practical example. Because we had that to rely on, we were able to go in and say to them, look, if you spend this money, you will save a lot of money. So I'm afraid I can't quite remember what the pound is worth, what the British pound is worth to the euro. I think it's about equal at the moment. So if I say 42 billion pounds, it's probably about 42 billion euros. And that is the annual cost of violence against women and girls in the UK. And that's all the spending that has to be done. And Sylvia Walby, who's one of our members, did all that costing work. And we were able to, and she used that from publicly available information. So it didn't require a lot of detailed modeling. It was just adding up all the amounts that are spent on these, because we know how many women suffer from domestic violence. And we know roughly how much it costs to take a case to court. So we were able to add all that up. We then went with that to our finance department and said, so all this adds up to 42 billion pounds. What we want you to do is spend a small amount on prevention work, and you will save all this money. So that's an example of the kind of argument you can start to make about savings. You can equally make political arguments about if you are making these tax and benefit changes, but you're not assessing what it means for women and girls, then you won't make efficient policy changes. So there's also an efficiency argument here about whether the government is actually going to achieve what it's attempting to achieve. So what we tried to persuade them to do was listen to us about these problems. And we ended up in a situation where they agreed that they would meet us 4 times a year in advance of any big announcement, and we would be given the opportunity to talk to them about it. We would take the feminist economists with us. We would agree in advance what the key issues were. So, for example, if they were planning to cut child care, then we would take information about what the impact on that would be, on women would be. So it does rely on you being able to do work outside with the universities, with economists, or with women's groups to pull together the information. So one of the things we've done a lot of is looked at local budgets, looked at how much a town or a city is spending on a particular issue like transport. And we work with the women in that area to say, what impact does this have on you? So can I have a few more minutes to answer this question? Can I keep going with this? Is that all right?
Yes.
Okay. So imagine if you looked at your local transport budget, and I bring it down to local level just because it's easier to imagine this happening. So you look at the local, how much is being spent locally, and you see that a lot of the money is being spent on a dual carriageway being built in the area. And you see that less money is being spent on pathways to school and safe ways for children to get to school, for example. And women who are taking their produce to market, you know, if they're subsistence farmers perhaps, or they're just small business owners and they want to get from one place to another. So we work with the local women in that area, and we look at the budget and we break the transport budget and we break down how it's being spent. And usually we find that the men will benefit from the spending more than the women. And we then go to that local government area and say, why are you doing this? Why are you dividing up the transport budget in a way that benefits, for example, car owners more than people who use public transport? And mainly it's women who use buses. Mainly it's women who take their children on buses. And often, if you look at the way in which public transport is managed, it is often designed around men's needs to commute from their home outside the city into the centre of the city, whereas women will often do journeys that mean that they go across the town, across the city, because they have to drop their children off at a childcare place. So all this is very dependent on the particular region and the particular ways in which people, the transport system has been designed. So what I'm saying may not be universally true right across Portugal. If you look at public transport, you will often find that it's done on this spoke and hub model where everything goes into the centre and comes out again, but it's much more difficult for women to go small journeys to their local work and dropping off children at childcare and going to the hospital and so on. So you need to do this level of analysis to then bring, and once you have that information, you can then bring pressure to bear on the people who are, on the politicians that you're talking about, and on the officials who are designing the transport policy.
Okay.
Sorry, that's very long. I apologize.
No, it's fine. I'm gonna try. So, portanto, a pergunta é como é que se pode apoiar a construção das políticas, a pergunta que a Ana Sá fez. Ela começou por responder que, considerando o contexto atual no Reino Unido, portanto, é em torno da coligação das organizações de defesa dos direitos humanos das mulheres e promoção da igualdade de género. fazendo uma coligação entre as mesmas no sentido de influenciar os líderes políticos, nomeadamente junto do Parlamento. E dentro do Parlamento, da Comissão de Orçamento, Finanças, etc. Isto não foi sempre assim no Reino Unido, portanto este processo começou já há muitos anos e antigamente de facto trabalhavam mais de perto com o Governo e nessa altura havia de facto um apoio que vinha de dentro do Governo para trazer estas preocupações no sentido de elas terem impacto na formação do orçamento e das políticas. Em concreto, ela considera que é fundamental de facto fazermos o tal business case, mostrar que é relevante esta questão. E o estudo que ela menciona da Sylvia Walby, que fez o levantamento dos custos da violência contra as mulheres e as raparigas no Reino Unido, que foi com base na informação que existe pública, evidenciou que os custos andavam à volta de 42 bilhões de euros. Ora, com este número é possível chegar a alguém que tem ambição política em termos de governo, etc., e dizer, atenção, este é um custo que, se pensarmos em outras medidas que promovem a igualdade de mulheres, mas não vai acontecer. E, portanto, há aqui um trade-off entre custos e benefícios que qualquer pessoa que esteja a concorrer em termos políticos vai considerar, e é uma mais-valia para a argumentação e para serem aliados nesta questão. Porque há uma poupança efetiva. Se forem medidas de intervenção específica neste domínio, há uma poupança porque o Estado gasta menos com os tribunais, com a questão de todos os custos de saúde, etc., 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 nos casos da violência contra as mulheres e as raparigas. Portanto, há uma poupança. E mostrar isso é importante. Depois, ao fim e ao cabo, é a questão do argumento da eficiência. É eficiente pensar os orçamentos sensíveis ao género. Faz sentido económico, é eficiente para o Estado. Neste momento, o que existe no Reino Unido é que elas têm um encontro 4 vezes por ano com interlocutores no sentido de fazer o tal business case, mostrar a evidência de que esta questão faz sentido nos mais variados domínios, e foi aqui dado um exemplo que tem a ver com o nível local e a questão dos transportes públicos e possíveis alterações nos transportes públicos, como é que elas vão ter impacto nas mulheres e nos homens, sendo que se sabe à partida que os homens são mais aqueles que conduzem automóveis e as mulheres à partida são mais aquelas que utilizam os transportes públicos. Por outro lado, mesmo na utilização, mesmo nas deslocações, há diferenças no comportamento das mulheres e dos homens. E ela falava aqui que geralmente no caso dos homens as deslocações por transporte privado são mais no sentido de fora da cidade para a cidade, portanto há um contínuo neste sentido, enquanto que as deslocações por parte das mulheres não são neste sentido, elas são de mais curta distância e mais variadas em termos dos locais para onde vão, portanto desde o hospital até à creche, etc, etc, ainda pelo trabalho de cuidado muito associado àquilo que é ser mulher na sociedade. Portanto, pensar alterações do orçamento de transportes e até do próprio desenho dos próprios transportes, fazendo esta análise, é fundamental para, de facto, sermos mais eficientes e respondermos às necessidades das mulheres e dos homens e, simultaneamente, ser mais eficientes economicamente. Claro que isto tudo depende do país onde estamos, tudo depende da região onde estamos e, portanto, essas dimensões específicas têm que ser consideradas na análise também. E acho que era isto. I think that's it. Já estamos na hora? Ok. Thank you so much. I think we are now in time to finish this part of the workshop. I think you really brought us wonderful issues for our reflection and analysis, and I'm sure we'll come back to you at some point, because we would love to have you here with us and have a group of feminist economists in Portugal. This would be really, really wonderful for our work. And thank you so much. And now I say goodbye to you. Okay.
Thank you very much for inviting us. And
Uma E vi fazer as análises, mas olha, este mês vai ser deixa-me ter organização, eu espero que vá ficar no estavas aqui depois eu falo contigo. Esta é a primeira agora que eu vou dar. Esta é muito gira. E do orçamento de género é capaz.
Hi, is the organizer?
Sim. Agora deixa-me ver agora estes. Mas isto é este.
Aquilo deve ser úmido e frio. E sol nenhum.
Elas não têm. E Elsa faz agora no Congresso uma menção.
Hi. I was hoping to just say something quickly to you.
Não, mas eu isso vocês gravaram. Gravando, vou desgravar, calma. Eu pus a gravar. Mas isto está aqui um eleio de fios. Espera aí. Estás a dar mais voltas? Estou. É que vão correr com a gente.
Can you hear me?
Vi. Já dá. É assim. Good. Pronto.
Can you hear me?
Entender as várias línguas, jogar. Eu gosto mais do francês, efetivamente. Mas agora deixa-me ver, vou fazer essa, vou para esse grupo. Porque não havia. Quero ser rato. E o raton. Eu e o raton somos duas coisas fundamentais. Olha, posso ver?
É a Lina. A Lina Play. Está a nossa equipa. Esta é a Lina Lopes. Ela está na nossa equipa na plataforma. Ela é da APM.
Ela é da APM?
Sim. Dentro da plataforma vem da APM.
Ok.